Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul. I really hope you'll forgive me for the fan in the background. It's just really hot. I tried to put it so that I was on one side of the room and the fan was on the other, so hopefully it's as far away as possible from the camera, but I'm not perfect. I don't have the ability to be God, so I hope you'll forgive me for not being a miracle maker. Today's episode of Just Paulism is going to be talking about why I think the friend zone is actually very underrated and how I think more people should be willing to give the friend zone a try and to be rejoicing whenever you have a trusted friend or multiple trusted friends that you can go to when you have troubles or just to hang out and have a good time so that you're not alone. Everyone deserves company. Even priests in the Catholic Church who take a vow of celibacy, if they're a diocesan priest, they're communicating with everyone in their parish. And if they're an order priest, then they have a community of what they call brothers that they live with. So even if you're not the type that's interested in marriage, I'm pretty sure almost all of you at least want some form of companionship. So the friend zone is more or less marriage for everyone, but without having sex, without trying to have kids. That's kind of redundant, but it also means you won't adopt kids. And you also won't cohabitate unless you're a roommate, which I guess you don't necessarily have to be friends to be a roommate. But the point is that the friend zone is often viewed as this really terrible thing. Like, oh no, I was friend zoned by the girl that I like. That's terrible. But what would even be more terrible, at least in my personal experience, would be if the girl wanted nothing to do with you. And she said, I feel like we don't have a genuine connection, and so therefore I will let you go your separate ways and I will just move on. Oh my gosh. I feel like that would almost be the antithesis of what you're trying to do in a date. Because when you're dating someone, your ultimate end goal is to determine if you're going to be married or not. And hopefully, if the date goes well, then you'll ask to marry each other. However, some couples, or I should say most couples, when they date, I think most of them, at least in the practicing Christian community, they at least want to think that they've made the right call for that spouse. They want to think that they've really prayed hard and said, this has got to be the one. I've got to get it right. And when they don't, they feel like the world has ended, even if one or both of them say, let's still be friends. Now, I have had multiple relationships and friendships that have ended in a friend zone. And admittedly, it stings a little bit at first because you've spent so much resources and time into trying to see if you want to spend the rest of your life with that person. And if it doesn't work out, then you think, well, that was just a monumental waste of time. Why did I even bother going through all that effort? But if you're in the friend zone, you are fulfilling the role of that constant advisor, that constant shoulder to cry on, that constant help. Whatever it is that you are good at, the other person is going to see that and value it. A couple of examples of good friend zoning that I've been able to do is I have, for example, studied autism all my life. So even my married female friends usually come to me before they come to their husbands if they have a question about the autism spectrum, because they say, oh, you're the expert, Paul. You know what you're talking about here. That doesn't mean that they're cheating on their husbands. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden the paradigm has shifted. It means that my role as a friend is a supporter, but it's not meant to be the father of her children, and it's not meant to be living with them till death do you part. But it is an eternal connection nonetheless that I wouldn't trade for anything. It means that if there's no one else in the world that is willing to support her, that she will say, Paul, I know that you're still there. That friend zone, I would like to say, I would go even farther as to say it's a friend lock, where only like a very special key can remove it. And in fact, one of my female friends who I had liked for so many years, and then she friend zoned me, sent me a card. I think it was a birthday card, but it might have just been an affirmation card in general. And that card had a Bible verse from the book of Sirach, which according to some Protestants, they don't acknowledge that as sacred scripture. They acknowledge it as what's called the Deuterocanon. But regardless, I still think you'll find it's a valuable life lesson, and that is, a faithful friend is a sturdy shelter. Whoever has found one has found a treasure. And I think that was her way of saying, Paul, I may have rejected you in terms of romance, but in terms of our friendship, you're a treasure to me. My gosh, that was the best feeling in the world when I heard that. I thought, I have found an irreplaceable woman in my life that just because we're not married does not mean we're not connected. It does not still mean that we hate each other. Now, I don't know if modern society really catches how powerful this verse is, but it specifically says treasure. Now, in the old days, treasure was something that you cherished, you held on to. Treasure chests, I think most people take that term for granted nowadays. They just think, oh, a treasure chest, that's just something you get in Zelda that contains an item. But treasure chests in the old days were locked with a key, and then they were like put into safekeeping and buried to make sure that no one could get that treasure. And if someone stole the treasure, you'd be losing valuable possessions. So well, again, I'm speaking from a guy's perspective here, but I'm sure there are plenty of guys that have friend-zoned girls out there. If a girl friend-zones me, but still considers me a treasure, that feels better than all the dates in the world. Because I think it's easy enough for someone to say during a relationship that, oh, I love you so much and I cherish you so much and I'll be there for you always, but then the relationship doesn't work out and all of a sudden those became empty words. In the friend zone, those words don't change because you're not trying to get to anything better. You've already reached the peak. Well, I guess technically you could maybe make a couple of advancements, but like, in terms of the layers of love that the Greeks used to define friendships, you have reached the pinnacle of what's possible without being related or married. And that's still not a bad thing at all. If you look at the Greek translation of, I forget the exact verse, but it was somewhere in the Gospel of John, where after Jesus is resurrected, he talks to Peter and he says, Simon, do you love me? 3 times. Now, in the English, that just sounds like Jesus is repeating himself, and it just sounds really annoying. And it sounds like Peter's response is, Lord, stop repeating yourself. You know everything. You know that I love you. But that's not how the Greek words it. In the Greek, Jesus asks, do you agape me, Simon? Now, agape is the word in the Greek language that's the highest form of love. Agape literally means unconditional, meaning that you will love that person even if they despise you and spit on you and hate you. In other words, what Jesus did on the cross. That's agape love. But that's not how Peter responded. Peter's response was, Lord, you know that I love you I forgot the exact Greek word, but it was the word used for like a brother or like a relative or like a friend. Jesus isn't condemning Peter for that. But at the same time, he knows that it could be better. But he's not saying, I hate you because you only love me as a brother. So then the third verse, Jesus changes the Greek that he uses. Instead of saying, do you agape me, Peter? He responds with, do you philos me? There's the word I was looking for. That's when Peter gets sad, because he notices the change in the Greek. So then Peter says, Lord, you know everything. You know that I philos you. In other words, Peter is admitting defeat. But then Jesus goes on to say, this is how you will die for me. In other words, proving that Peter will eventually get to the point of agape love. I think this verse is absolutely beautiful because it shows that agape love seems like it's this impossible ordeal that's only able to be done by God. But yet at the same time, Jesus called the disciples when they were broken messes. Even with Peter denying Jesus 3 times, Jesus could have said, no, I know everything. I know that these disciples are a bunch of morons, so I just won't even call them at all. He still gave them a chance. What does that have to do with the friend zone, you might be asking? Because I personally would like to think that agape love is too categorical in this case. I think it's actually possible to have both philos and agape love for a person. You could love someone unconditionally as a friend, but that doesn't mean that you're going to have any less love for them. It just means that the type of love that you have is different. I guess you could say when you're married, obviously you go the extra mile with things like sex and childbirth, cohabitation, sleeping in the same bed. But that's not to say that if you love your husband or your wife, that means that you don't still love your friends in a philos way. I could say that most of my female friends would probably, without hesitation, if I were to drag them into this shot right now and say, do you love me? They would say, oh my gosh, Paul, I love you so much, and give me a big hug. That doesn't mean that they're cheating on their husbands. It doesn't mean that they are all of a sudden breaking their marriage vows. It's that it's a different type of love, and it's still a powerful love. If I were to die tomorrow, they would be at my funeral. They would be willing to be there and support my parents. If I were to, say, be starving to death and had no means of getting to the grocery store, my friends, you better darn believe it, they would go out and they would get me those groceries. If I was going through depression, actually, that did happen. When I was going through depression, they stood by my side the entire time. Even though I said really nasty things to them that would have assuredly scared anyone else away and said, I can't handle that, Paul. I cannot handle you constantly doubting me. They didn't. They stuck by me through thick and thin and said, we still love you, Paul. We are still going to support you. And if they hadn't done that, then all those girls that got me out of depression at the conference would have meant nothing, because I contrasted their words with the words of my friends that I had already met and said they must not be lying. When you're in a dating relationship, obviously I'm sure you could have that kind of intense love while you're in the relationship. But if it doesn't work out, there's always that sliver of a chance that that love will just disappear. I know of certain friends of mine who are in very deep relationships, and that person would say, I love you, to the other person. But then the relationship didn't work out. Does that mean they still love their spouse? Or have they moved on? That's why I like the friend zone so much, is you don't move on from the friend zone. You don't stop loving each other. You still look out for each other's interests. You still are there for them through thick and thin. You will still do whatever it is that's necessary. And why aren't more people rejoicing about this? Marriage is great. Marriage is beautiful. It was the very first commandment in the Bible. Be fruitful and multiply. I'm not trying to make the claim that you shouldn't go out and get married. What I am saying, though, is that marriage is also very difficult. And there are certain challenges that come with cohabitation and childbirth that friends aren't necessarily going to see. When you're in a friendship, you typically don't hang out with that person on a daily basis. You might maybe go on vacation with that person for like a week or two. You might hang out like once a month. So you only see that person on select times. So in a sense, that makes it slightly easier to love because you're not doing all of those challenges of having a sacramental commitment. And that's why I personally think that if I'm never called to be married, if I never do find the girl that I'm going to spend the rest of my life with, that I'll be so thankful that I have so many females in my life that would still be able to say, Paul, I love you, even though we're not married. I love you philosly, if that's a word. I love you as a brother, and I love you in the sense that I will be whatever it is that you need. That's so beautiful. And people that say they don't want that, I think are actually hurting themselves. Now, maybe I don't know everything about relationship dynamics. Maybe it's harder for some people to just change their hearts like that after a really intense relationship. Maybe you were dating someone for 4 years and all of a sudden you're not dating and you're single. Maybe it's harder to still be able to love that person. But maybe, just maybe, you can say, let me at least try this friend zone thing. That way, there's still love. There's still that big, not necessarily living together commitment, but there's still a commitment to serve and to do what Jesus commanded us to do. Love one another as he has loved us. Jesus didn't differentiate between male and female or any of that stuff. I know that could be sounding like I'm pro LGBT, but God and human sexuality are like on two totally different planes, so don't put words in my mouth. God is willing to treat everyone with whatever it is that they need. And that is how we should be with everyone else. What we need is not necessarily the same as what we want. Just because we want to give in to our sexual urges does not mean that we should give in to our sexual urges. We might need certain things, and God will always provide for our needs. But God is not going to snap his fingers and provide literally everything for us. That is why he made his beautiful declaration in the Gospel of Matthew where he said, when I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me a drink. Whatever you did to the least of my people, you did it to me. In other words, God is giving us power to be like him. He's giving us the power to serve and to give and to fill each person's needs. And doesn't that just make you feel like the most wonderful person in the world, that you have the ability to be like God, which is the very thing that the devil tried to use to trap Adam and Eve? So, at the end of the day, this video might have gone on a bit too long, but I hope it's at least shaped your perspective of how a breakup does not mean all of a sudden that the world is doom and gloom and everything is terrible. If anything, it might just mean that you're setting yourself up for a better love that you didn't think was possible in the midst of your hormones telling you a different story. Your hormones may very well have not been what you needed and just what you wanted. So with that, thank you very much for listening to my spiel. Let me know down in the comments section what are some of the best friendships you've ever had. And if you are in a relationship or if you're married, then tell me like how that is beautiful to you. But maybe also let me know like who are some of your friends that you still keep in touch with even after marriage, and like how you're not just going to become antisocial to everyone else. Just let me know a question anyway, because I love talking to you guys. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!